Hey everybody, this is Marina, your podcast host at UNBOSSED. Here we go. At UNBOSSED, I interview amazing women in Chicago. There is so much woman power in this city that I want to provide these women a platform to tell their story. Please connect with us and please consider supporting by sharing, liking, commenting the podcast. Tell all your Netflix friends and family about it. Submit a recommendation for a guest, subscribe on your favorite podcast app, and donate by clicking on the anchor link and help me continue to make great episodes. I hope you enjoy and welcome to the show. Phyllis Glink is the executive director of the Irving Foundation. In her over 2 decades with the foundation, she has led, developed, and implemented its grant-making and field leadership work in the areas of early childhood development and child and family welfare, reproductive health and justice, Jewish values, and social justice. Phyllis works closely with the foundation's partners in the nonprofit, advocacy, philanthropy, and government communities to leverage shared investment and maximize the impact of foundation grants in Illinois and across the country. She leads the foundation's partnerships with national replication and public policy efforts such as BUILD, the Early Learning Challenge Collaborative, First 5 Years Fund, and the Alliance of Early Success, amongst many others. Phyllis holds many leadership roles in the public and philanthropic sectors, including serving as co-chair of the Governor's Early Learning Council, the Illinois Commission on Equitable Funding for Early Childhood Education and Care, the Advisory Board on the National Center of Excellence in Infant and Early Childhood Mental Health Consultation, the Membership Committee of the Early Childhood Funders Collaborative, and co-chairs BUILD's Advisory Board. Past leadership includes serving on the State Illinois Department of Human Services Child Care Advisory Council for 20 years, including twice chairing strategic planning task forces for the department, Health Connect's One National Doula Leadership Institute, and the Chicago Children's Museum's Early Childhood Advisory Board. She was a co-founder and developer of the BUILD Initiative, the First 5 Years Fund, the Alliance of Early Success, and Illinois Barbara Bowman's Leadership Fellowship. Mrs. Glink served on the 2008 Health and Human Services Transition Team for the Obama administration. She's also served on the Health Transition Team for the Rauner administration, the Pritzker Education Transition Team, and the Lightfoot Education Transition Team. Prior to joining the Irving Foundation, Ms. Glink worked for the Chicago Community Trust, focusing on grant-making and program development in the areas of education and women's and girls' issues. Mrs. Glink started her career in philanthropy at the University of Chicago, where she worked for 7 years in the Central Development Office as a mayor's gift officer, raising funds for the successful $650 million capital campaign. Welcome, Phyllis.
Right. I've never been interviewed for a podcast, Marina.
Oh my God, this is perfect. Hey everybody, this is your host, Marina Malagudi at UNBOSSED. Today, my guest is Phyllis Glink. She is the executive director at the Irving Foundation. Welcome to my podcast.
Thanks, Marina. I'm so grateful to be here.
Thank you. And I was telling you, it's crazy nowadays because it's end of the year and there's a lot going on. I can't wait to talk to you about what's happening with the foundation. I'm sure you also have a lot going on right now. But I want to start with giving our audience a context about you and where did you grow up? Are you from Chicago originally?
I am from Chicago. I grew up in the Lakeview neighborhood in the city. And I've lived in and around Chicago most of my life with a brief stint in, Ann Arbor for college and New York briefly out of college, but
nice.
not for long.
Michigan and New York. That's awesome. How, what was like growing up in Chicago? Did you, especially in Lakeview and then going to college here?
So I loved growing up in the city. I don't know. I've been reflecting on that lately as we've been seeing what's been going on in various neighborhoods around Chicago. And, I grew up at a time where it just felt like there was a lot of freedom to explore And I lived pretty close to Lincoln Park and the lake. And I grew up starting at age 9, taking public transportation to school and by taking my bike out into Lincoln Park and biking along the lake. So one of my favorite things to do still to this day is biking all the length of the lake all the way to Hyde Park and back, and walking all the time. And so for me, growing up in the city, we lived in you know, a really interesting neighborhood. You know, hasn't changed actually much since I was growing up. And, you know, I loved it. It was just very vibrant, and I have lots of memories of just, you know, hanging out and, you know, playing football in the park or, you know, whatever it might be. So Chicago was a great place to grow up.
And you said, you know, like you said, it was a great place to grow up. And you said there has been conversation obviously about, and I'm thinking about I think the level of crimes that have been increasing lately. Is that correct? So tell me about the conversation that has been happening and the reflection behind.
I don't live in the city right now, so it's not for me to say. I have always felt like Chicago is such an accessible place, and you know, I want to believe that if I had raised my kids in the city, I would have felt the same way of go explore. The city is yours to understand. And the Chicago is so great because it has so many great neighborhoods and all kinds of different, you know, ethnic groups. And it's just very vibrant. But I think, you know, what has at least the perception among my friends who have kids in the city is they don't feel that it is as open and free as it once was. And I don't know if that's because we now have more access to social media and different kinds of ways of reporting things that may have always been happening that are now happening, but you know about them in real time, or if there has been a change. And, you know, for me and the work that I do at the foundation, which is, you know, really striving, we focus particularly on early childhood, but it's about how can we make the city work for all of its citizens. It hasn't been safe for many people for many years, right? The kind of violence that may be bleeding into parts of the city that have never had that kind of level of violence has been happening in many communities for a very long time. So maybe the silver lining of all of this is that there'll be a heightened awareness and attention paid to actually trying to solve some of the challenges. You know, we're big advocates that by investing in early childhood and creating safe and nurturing spaces for all children, that will start to, you know, combat the toxic stress that many communities and families have been experiencing. And so, you know, I don't know, it's complex. So those are the nature of the conversation. You know, what's behind this feeling of unsafety? Is it really, is it perception? Is it reality? Is it, you know,
is it, I think the question, is it new or is it old too, right? Like you said, it's like, maybe it's always been there. We just didn't know, where we're not as aware about it as before.
I think it's a both and. And you know, what's at the heart of it and why, and what should we be doing about it collectively, and what's our responsibility to each other and to our community, and I mean community collectively, you know, like we're all in community. What's our responsibility? To show up for each other and to figure that out. So I don't know, those are the nature of the conversations I'm having. And whether or not, you know, I also think, you know, during COVID, if you lived near the lake and the park, you still had access to outdoor space, but I don't think everybody felt that way always in their community. And so, you know, I think that there's just a whole different kind of conversation that people are having.
Yeah, absolutely. I do like the conversations, though. They are, as you mentioned, at least bringing out awareness to, you know, having those discussions and doing something about it versus keeping them tucked away in one neighborhood or in one specific group of people.
Right. Yeah. And we haven't been having that conversation. So however that's getting forced, you know, I think the ultimate goal will be to have that conversation in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
And really start to think about what some of the solutions may be.
Yeah, I love that. So tell me give me a little bit of color of who was Phyllis in the city at 9 years old, going around. Like, do you have a story about, like, what was it like, even like your first time taking a train? How old were you? And
I grew up on the bus line, so I did not grow up on the, on the train line. It was many years actually till I was taking the L to and from work or whatever, because my world was slightly more east than that. But I grew up on the 22 and the 36 bus on Clark and Broadway, which were super interesting for a little kid because they're full of really interesting characters. And I also grew up taking the 156 and the 151 to and from school or downtown to Michigan Avenue or stuff like that. I'm an identical twin, so I kind of went through the world when I was younger with my twin sister, and we also grew up at a time like last winter. I think it was last winter, or we had tons of snow, but that was very typical when I was growing up to have that kind of snow. And we would go into Lincoln Park and build our igloos and our we would sled down the hill at Diversey in Lincoln Park and go ice skating on a lagoon, and we took advantage really of all that the city had to offer. And I think we kind of felt invincible. We would go around in our little gang of 9-year-olds, to and from school. We'd meet up with our friends, and it really did feel like, just like a neighborhood.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's really cool. So how is it like growing up with an identical twin as well? Is it true that you have specific powers?
Well, we used to try to pretend to be the Wonder Twins. We have an older sister, so she was really also helpful and instrumental in showing us the way. But, I think when you have a twin, you kind of know you always have somebody who's got your back. It's sort of at least for us, we're still very close with both of my sisters. But, growing up as an identical twin, people back then, I still think there's a lot more twins today because of fertility. There's not any more, identical twins. They're still the same limited, because that's, just genetic. So it was a little bit of a oddity, and, that got a lot of attention.
How many times have you pretended to be each other?
We used to do that when we were younger, and then when we went to separate colleges. So for the first time ever, nobody knew we were identical twins.
Oh, yeah.
So that was a lot of fun when she would come visit me. I went to University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. It's huge. And, people would stop and engage her in long conversations when she wasn't with me, and she didn't know how to say, I'm not Phyllis, So we had a lot of fun with it. But she lives in New York now, so we don't get to play the twin game quite as often.
Oh, no. I totally wanted a twin so I could just send her to my work.
Exactly. But she's a lawyer, so I can't keep up with her. She's a lawyer. She does labor litigation.
Just pretend for a week. I'll take a 3-week vacation. 1 week, you pretend to go in. The 2 weeks are vacation.
I'll shoot that idea to her and see if it flies.
Oh, that would be awesome. Okay, so Chicago was your like almost as in like yours to explore, and
that's how I felt.
That's amazing. And so how did you choose to go to Michigan for school?
It's a funny story. My older sister is 2 years older.
Yeah.
And we were on the college visiting, circuit with her, and we were in the car and doing lots of trips all over. And we pulled into Ann Arbor for her college visiting trip. It was pouring rain. It was cold. It was a terrible day. And I took one step on that campus, and I don't know, it just spoke to me or something. It was like, yes, this is where I want to go. It was weird because, I hadn't really, it was just, there was something about it. I'd gone to a very small school in the city. I went to Latin school growing up. So it was a small private school. I had 60 kids in my grade. And I think I was just ready for something big. Sure. Yeah. And Ann Arbor is a great town, and Michigan, it just spoke to me. So when I got to my senior year, they had at the time, I have a senior in high school now, so I'm wishing for those days where they had a rolling admissions process, and as soon as you applied, they would review you and tell you if you were in or out. It was very simple back then. Not today. Today's November 1st, and my senior just applied to her first round of schools, and it's not as easy. But I got in October in Michigan, and I never looked back. That was the only place I applied, and off I went, and I had a great time.
That's awesome. And so what did you study again when you were in Michigan?
I was an English major, and then I studied, it's obscure, but Russian Eastern European Studies. And that's it's obscure. Because I was in, I think Michigan for me, had always been sort of, my parents we always volunteered. We always sort of participated in our community. But it was really, I think, in Ann Arbor where I sort of learned how to be an activist and how to like get involved in an issue. And I got involved, I'm Jewish, and I got involved with a student group called Student Struggle for Soviet Jewry. At the time, Soviet Jews were not allowed to leave the Soviet Union, and they were persecuted and oppressed. And so we were part of a national movement of international movement, really, to advocate for their rights to be able to leave the Soviet Union. And so I ended up getting involved with that group and doing things like, chaining myself to the grad school steps and all my candlelight vigils where you would read name after name of the Soviet Jews who were being kept in their country. And it was a good time. I like to say I had good timing because while I was ended up being president of that student group, the Jews were actually let out of the Soviet Union and started to emigrate to all over, all over the world. So we did a big march in Washington. So it was sort of like my awakening in that regard.
Yeah, totally. I giggle there because the chaining to the campus statue is very iconic of the American activism and the sentiment. A very, very important issue, and I'm so glad you got involved and you felt so pressed about it. How did your interest in children and evolved from this? Because I know you're very into childhood, right, and childhood education and activism around generally, like advocating for better childhood upbringing. How did that happen?
I do a lot of mentoring over the years of people coming into the field, and I had to reflect, like, how is it that I ended up, so passionate about this? And when I'll go back to my Judaism, I was bat mitzvahed at 12 and a half. And I remember the rabbi saying, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I wanted to be a pediatrician. Yeah. And that was because, I loved children and I wanted to help people. And then, of course, I realized, I had no talent for it. Blood and illness were not sort of like motivators for me. And I went off and did all these other things. But when I came back after college and after my first stint in working, and I came back and I started to think about where I wanted to sort of put my energy and my mark, I ended up focusing on early childhood and poverty and thinking about why didn't the city and work for all of its children and what needed to change. And then I went through a period of networking and trying to understand, like, how would I do that work? And I discovered the not-for-profit sector, which, I'm just turned 55. So like back in the day, you didn't go get recruited into the nonprofit sector. It wasn't sort of as robust as it is today. And so I started my journey, and I found out about foundations. I was 23, and I was basically told, you're never going to get a job at a foundation. And I went out and explored, and I ended up working for the University of Chicago for 7 years doing fundraising, and I loved it. But it was then that I discovered the Harris School for Public Policy Studies, and I went back as a graduate student, while working, and ended up focusing on child and family policy and early childhood. And it was there that I sort of found my real passion. And I had been volunteering for years when I got out of college for like the Jewish Children's Bureau and doing like both direct service volunteering and raising money. So I'd already been in that sort of child and family space, but it was graduate school where I sort of honed all those skills, and also got to meet Irving Harris through that because I went to the Harris School and the dean introduced us. At the time, I had been an intern for a year at the Chicago Community Trust, and I had been working on women and girls issues and education issues. I met some of my early mentors there, which was, I still consider them mentors, and they were leaders, and they, helped guide me through my career. And I got hired by Irving when I finished graduate school. So I had worked for many years before graduate school, and then went to work for the foundation.
Love it. A few interesting questions. Like, you're 23 and you're trying to like figure out your way in the world at this point. Like, you know, like as we encounter, as people hear this and they have questions about what their passion aligns to the work and vice versa, you know, like, what was your thought, maybe even looking back or thinking about that moment for you on how to make those two things match, right? Because there's a lot of people that work and their passions are not completely aligned yet. And so I just would love to hear your perspective.
I mean, I think a lot of people work and their passions are not aligned. And I think I'm so fortunate, right, that because, you know, as I say, even in this job, it's still called work because it's hard. And some days are really good and some days are not. But I know at the end of the day that what I'm spending my time doing is something that I am passionate about, and I'm very mission driven, and I'm very fortunate. I think what I try to tell people is to really explore what makes them tick. And it doesn't have to be something that's around, you know, social justice, or it can be, I really want to understand how technology can help people access important information. And, you know, I care a lot about making systems work better for people. And that may look like working in a big corporation or whatever it may be. But I try to help people who I mentor identify what keeps them up at night and what do they think about and what are they excited about, because you spend a lot of time working, and, you know, better to be doing something that brings you some kind of meaning, and it doesn't have to be the meaning that I have. So for me, it was really, you know, I identified foundations and I said, yes, that's what I wanted to do. And then literally I started networking, and I tell people, you know, networking is super important, even if you're not looking for a job. Making relationships, like our work is so relationship based. But I feel like, you know, making relationships, knowing how to build them, foster them, that's ultimately how I got into this position. But it was 9 years after I started looking. It took me 9 years to get a job in a foundation. And in the interim, I found a role that was meaningful to me and gave me good skills, which was raising money for University of Chicago. At the end of the day, after 7 or 8 years, I thought, well, I could do this the rest of my life, but I won't continue to be challenging. And I'm not directly meeting the needs of the people that I most want to serve. So at the University of Chicago, they have a lot of very high percentage of first-time college goers. You know, it was good work, but it wasn't ultimately my passion work, right? What was going to keep me going. So that's when I discovered the Harris School. I actually took a class on poverty with Susan Mayer, and I thought, I want to do more of this kind of work. And so I went back and, you know, didn't know where it was going to take me, but ended up, but I kept thinking about philanthropy and what the power that it could have if done well to bring resources back into communities that so need them, and to work in collaboration and partnership with our public partners, with our not-for-profit partners and community partners.
Love that.
And
it's almost as if I'm hearing, like, you have to do a lot of what sometimes you don't like or don't fully like in order to figure out kind of like what you like, but know that you need to pivot and continue to pivot until you find that thing that aligns.
Right. And also recognize that, like, there's no linear pathway all the time to your role. And I think we are raised to feel like if we leave something, it's quitting. You know, my first job was in retail. I went into a Macy's executive training program in New Jersey, and you know, I'm not a quitter. So it took like a year for me to feel like, okay, I don't like this, right? I don't want to do this, right? But can I quit? Like, is this, you know, I think we don't give ourselves permission. And I think, you know, you have to be able to give yourself permission to say, well, what can I take from this? Bring it to my next role. But this isn't necessarily the role for me.
Yeah. Love that. The other thing that I heard is 7 years of raising money or raising funds for University of Chicago, right? And I'm so interested into the art of raising money in general, because first of all, there's a million books that have been written about this, which I've read a handful of because, you know, it's part of like who I am. I want to know about some of these things. And so I would love to hear about your style. What is your formula of success, quote unquote? And I say it in a way is like most people may feel weird about asking for money for this cause or this cause, but we all have a cause that we want to raise money for, whether you're selling a business,
sure, right,
whether you're raising money for or your daughter is raising money for their field trip,
right,
you know, whether you're raising
selling Girl Scout cookies, you know, it could be anything.
Or and you've been doing this for so long. I would love to hear what are your lessons about raising money. You know, and we can apply it to both spectrums. It's like, what do you do with smaller sums of money,
sure,
or like larger strategies, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I think really at the heart of everything we do, and now I'm fortunate that I don't have to raise the money, we get to give it away. But I raised money for many years, and in some ways we're trying to leverage money now, right? So like we use our private money to leverage public investments, and that has a different art and strategy. But at the end of the day, that's fine. The end of the day, I think at the heart of all of it is two things. Trying to be psychologically minded, right? You have to be an active listener to understand when you're trying to raise money from somebody, what do they care about? What brought them joy when they were at the University of Chicago, or when they think about supporting XYZ organization or entity? And then how do you form a real authentic relationship with them? You know, I think for us right now in our work, whether you're raising money or giving it, relationships are central to building a collaborative process where you're doing that work. So for us at the university, when I was at the University of Chicago, it was really about, I was working with alumni, was about making a connection with them that was meaningful, listening carefully to what it was that motivated them, and then figuring out how to turn that into a donation or a contribution to something that would in turn bring them joy and connect them to that part of themselves that they were trying to express through their giving. So that could be scholarship support. It could be building a building, because some people want that. I didn't get to have an athletic center when I was at school, and that would have made me feel XYZ. Or for Irving Harris, when he was giving to the Harris School, it was, I think the world has plenty of business people who have MBAs, but we're looking to put out into the universe people who bring sort of that double interest in both business and strategy and social justice and the common good. And so for him, it was training leaders who could go out in work in spaces to bring that orientation and perspective to bear and try to be change agents, right? Yeah. So for him, it was about creating a pipeline of leaders who could go out and do that work, whether it's in the climate area or children and families or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I think finding what's important to somebody, and that's about relationships.
Yeah.
You know?
Okay, so a few things are, how do you teach your kids? I don't know if you have daughters or sons.
I have 2 daughters.
2 daughters, amazing. I have 3 daughters, so I'm gonna teach them this lesson. How do you teach your kids? They're going out and raising money to sell to go to a field trip. How do you teach them, like, one-on-one, this is how you do it?
Well, it's still teaching. You know, I think one of the first words I tried to teach them was advocate. I particularly think that's important for girls.
Okay.
To know how to advocate for themselves and what they're thinking and feeling, whether that's in the classroom or it's trying to get somebody to donate to something that they care about.
Yeah.
You know, like finding their voice and finding some, a way of helping people connect to what is meaningful to them. So, it's hard for my kids now are 17 and 16, so they're getting a little bit better at it, being able to say, hey, I'm doing this and this is why it's important to me, and I'd like to know if you'd be willing to donate to it. But I also think it's equally important for them to be able to talk to a teacher or any adult and say, I don't agree with your point of view, and here's my point of view, and do it in a way that invites conversation and invites, collaboration instead of shuts that down, right? So I think it's sort of a skill. So I guess for raising money, it's about helping my kids articulate why they care about it, why it's important to them, so that they can help other people understand it, right?
I like
and
it.
So,
yeah,
I guess that's what I'd say.
I love. And then the part about relationship is like, I have this preconceived notion that building relationships takes a lot of effort and time, and for some reason, when I think about fundraising, I think about it's a limited period of time. Sometimes, you go through some type of temporary spurs that you have to fulfill a certain amount of goal or money, right? How do you balance these two components, right? Like the time limit, and then the part where you have to create a relationship that may take a lot of, and please correct me if I'm wrong. If it doesn't take a long time, please let me know. How do you do it? But yeah, I would love to talk about that, the tension between those two.
I mean, yes. I mean, it's been a while since I've had to raise money like that. But what I will say is, how one, today with Facebook and all, you could raise money every day for something, right? And I have a hard time connecting to those kinds of campaigns, right? Because I'm like, I'm glad that's your birthday and I care about you. And if you care about that, I would give. But I think what really helps people is just the personal connection with you, and then with the organization or cause that you're trying to champion.
Thank you.
And so I think that, making that personal connection, it could take a long time, but it could also, take some really good strategic thinking about how one makes it more real and more personal.
Got it.
And so I think that for me, that resonates more actively and more clearly. Like I want to know from somebody. So I always think personal connection matters. And we kind of seem to move away from that. I joke that my kids don't even think the phone is like something you actually talk into sometimes. Like no one communicates that way. They just text. You'd be sitting next to each other and texting. I'm like, no, talk to each other. I think we're losing the art of conversation, and that shows up later in life, in the workplace, how people know. I mean, I was an English major, so being able to communicate in writing is super important. And I think it's a skill that we're losing.
Are you the mom that corrects their text and you're like,
well,
this is how you...
we've gone down that path, but I choose to try to not to do that. But I think it's just important. And I think we've sort of lost that skill.
Yeah.
And I think, it's been really interesting during COVID to figure out, like, I think for us as an organization, we have 15 members and 5 new people who started during COVID, and we've barely gotten to actually know them, that we're missing to some degree that human connectivity, the extra stuff you get when you're talking to somebody that is nonverbal, that you don't pick up all the time after days and days and days of Zoom. And I think, figuring out how to find the right balance so that we can come back together and remember, why we all are working toward the same thing. And, so finding the way to use technology to help support that, because we never had Zoom before COVID. So it's a wonderful addition. And then also finding the right balance of how one keeps the sort of connectivity and, personal relationships that you get from knowing somebody over time and building that kind of trust and rapport.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that. And you are now, so just quick switch into the other part of money, I guess, which is like you're now you said you're giving away money.
Yes.
Other side, right? You're
other side.
Asking for money, and then now you're giving away money.
Yep.
And you said something interesting, and please repeat it for me. But you said now you use private money to leverage public investment.
Yes.
What does that mean?
So there's never going to be enough philanthropy in the world, no matter how many billionaires give away money.
Why is that?
Because there's public money is. So Irving Harris, who is my boss and my mentor, he used to start some lectures by saying, "Who knows who Willie Sutton is?" And nobody would raise their hand because Willie Sutton was a bank robber. And so he would say, "Why did Willie Sutton rob the banks?"
He was Robin Hood.
Because that's where the money was.
Yeah.
The same thing with public-private partnerships. So the money is really the big money to solve some of these big, complex issues is public money. how we choose to invest it, the choices we make as a society. We're having that discussion right now with the Build Back Better. Do we invest in paid leave or not? Do we invest in childcare and preschool or not?
Or not, yeah.
And we have enough money because we spend it elsewhere, but we're making choices every day with the way we use our public dollars. Are we going to put it into farm subsidies, or are we going to put it into SNAP?
Yeah.
I mean, we're making choices all the time. And we're thinking about our world as a zero-sum game. They win, we lose. And it doesn't need to be that way because there's enough money. The issue is, how do we help change the way we talk about why we need to invest and why we as a country need to create, align our funding to a different set of values. And so for us at the foundation, we have always invested not in so much direct service, but in more upstream strategies that are designed to leverage the way public systems and public money is invested. Okay. So instead of investing in a childcare center, we want to change childcare policy so that when they make a decision, it affects all the kids in childcare, not just the ones in that childcare center.
Yes.
Right?
Okay.
And so those are more sort of upstream strategies. Okay. And so for us, we can't do that with private philanthropy alone. We need to figure out how we collaborate and partner with our public sector partners so that we're changing the policies, the systems, the structures that support children and families.
Because so they're the ones in the system.
And they have the money. Right? Our public dollars are much greater than the private philanthropy dollars that get invested. And so you could if we took all the private philanthropy dollars alone and just put it in child and family, we would make some dent. But we wouldn't, it's nothing compared to the amount of money. I mean, we're talking about another $400 billion in the Build Back Better campaign, potentially, for child care and preschool. We give away $8 million a year. It's not. And so if we can use our $8 million to leverage that $400 billion and then some, our Illinois system right now, we invest $1.8 billion in early childhood. Yeah. To do the system well, we need $12 billion a year. So we need to figure out, how are we going to work with our public sector partners so that we continuously get more and more public investment in, and then the private money can be for things like R&D, bringing, convening people together to think about best practices, ensuring there's a racial equity lens that's brought to the work that we're doing, making sure the state cares about racial equity and centering that so that when they do the work, they're being held accountable. Yeah. So for us, and the way the foundation's always worked is sort of in collaboration and partnership with our public sector partners.
Got it. So that's super interesting to me, because sometimes we think as nonprofits and there are definitely a lot of nonprofits that are on the ground, right? They're like feeding the homeless, they're helping they're like housing the homeless, feeding, people who need food, or, helping people in need on the ground. And the way your foundation takes a different approach, or, not better or worse, just different approach, is thinking about the system and leveraging, like you said, like using the private investment to changing system in partnership with public money and public organizations, or the government specifically.
Yes, and what hasn't always happened well, and I think philanthropy is shifting, as is government, which is, how does one actually listen to and learn from the stakeholders who are on the ground, who are experiencing how childcare is operating day to day, to the parents who are struggling to find access to something that will support their family's needs, and have that inform the system's decisions and the policy decisions that get made, right? So the foundation is in the intermediary kind of between the stakeholders. We're one of the stakeholders trying to help inform the way the government works. And I think what we haven't done as well is empower those community voices to speak up. So for our foundation, that's looked like, for the last 15 years, we do reproductive health and justice as well. shifting the way we've taken our monies and invested in large, predominantly white-led organizations, and start to invest over many years in building the grassroots and BIPOC-led capacity of the field, so that now there's an active, sort of stronger movement on which to build and to lift up those voices to inform the way policies are being made. I think the same kind of movement is happening in the early childhood and childcare field, and so we've been shifting over the last 5 years or so to investing in more grassroots organizing and movement building, to collaborate and partner with the advocacy groups and then with government, so that we can do a better and better job of making sure that the voices of those who are closest and the most proximate to the issues that we're trying to solve are informing the way those decisions are getting made.
And so I totally understand this, and yet for me, and hopefully the audience has the same feeling, is like it's extremely murky. Like how do you
it is murky.
Like how do you I believe there is a great want and need for a lot of people today, even in the city of Chicago. I talk to peers, male and female, all the time about the wanting and the need to wanting to express support, voice our opinion, influence, be change makers for public good, except we don't know where to go. We don't know what to do, right? And so like I would love and we cannot and by the way, I'm gonna put a few caveats in there. I love tech. I like what I'm doing. I don't necessarily am seeking a career in philanthropy. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying I want to also use me as a way to help others, right? I see that I am, for instance, the person who's most upset with CPS and ever, always, all the time.
Yeah, right. Well, there's lots of reason for that.
Yeah, there's many reasons for that. Specifically, one of them is that I have to pay a ridiculous amount of money for daycare right now because I have an 8 months old and there's no public service.
Well, if the Build Back Better can't change it.
I know, I'm supporting
that's a huge thing. No one will pay more than 7% of their income in childcare.
Fingers crossed. We'll
been a long haul.
Fingers crossed. But for instance, even now, tell me, if there's a few activities that I don't know if you know this, so please correct me, but what can I do as an individual to contribute, right?
I guess I would answer this. I'm going to take one step back and then I'm going to give you my thoughts. Irving used to talk about, he would adapt an African story about babies in the river, and I'm going to tell a very abbreviated version, right? There's friends having a picnic by the side of a river, and they look up, there's a baby in the river. Someone takes off his shoes, he runs in, he grabs the baby, he gets to the bank, hands it to a friend, and looks up, another baby. Runs back in, comes back again with the baby, and this goes on and on for a little bit. And finally, he says to the woman, you run into his friends, you go into the river and grab the babies, and he starts running upstream. And they said, where are you going? I'm going to find out who's putting the babies in the river so I can stop them, right? And he would stop the story there to make a point about that's why we fund advocacy and systems and policy work, because we want to fundamentally change what's been going on. I like to then say, but there's so many places along the riverbank for you to enter the river, right? You could be all the way down at the bottom because there's an enormous need to help just immediately take those kids out of the river. And that looks like volunteering at your local shelter, dropping off food at the food pantry, signing up for your local community, network group so that you can bring your voice to the issue. A little bit higher up on the stream, it might look like, I'm going to invest in the workforce and training the workforce, because that builds capacity for people to serve the children that need to be served. And then a little higher up might look like something else. And everybody is going to enter where they are most comfortable in their own bodies and in their own time. But what now we need to know is who's below us and who's above us, and how is what I'm doing supporting and affecting those people as well. Because if all of us along the riverbank are working together, then maybe we can solve the problems, right? And I think what's been even more challenging, and appropriately so, is, we really have systems of oppression that are baked into our systems. And we need to dismantle those and rebuild those, and those are really, really challenging. And that's why we need to empower the voices of people like you know, in your community, of grassroots organizers, because it's only by bringing those voices to the forefront that we'll actually be able to start to have the power to push back and start to make those kinds of changes, right? We have to be able to like hold people accountable. So for someone like you, I feel like there's a lot of ways you could, I mean, go get involved in your local school council, or, I mean, people are busy, but that's one way to do it, or just show up to parent meetings and give your voice and say and write a letter to your local legislator. Or, you know, there's like a million ways that people can actually get involved that works. You know, like, you know, voting is a big issue right now for me and my family. Like, people are not getting access to it. We did a lot of postcard writing and different kinds of things during the last election. We went out and volunteered. And, you know, I think that there's just a lot of ways that somebody can choose to get involved that works for their own lives, but also for the whole system. But understanding where you are in that whole system of people working on those issues, I think is really important, and is what makes our democracy a democracy.
Yeah.
And that's at risk now too. So, you know, it's more important today that we use our voices, I feel like.
Yeah, I love that. That's really nice. Like, I do feel like there's a lot of work that could happen at the local level, and I still, for some reason, feel like access to systemic change is not there for individuals. I want to say, I don't know. It feels like it's like a reserved place for people that have organizations or fit a specific background or whatever that is, or know the system better, right? Like, whatever that is, put in the fill in the blank is like systemic change is only accessible to X, right? And so if we had to go upstream in our activism, how will we go about that? Or, you know?
I mean, I think the most important thing is making sure that we're getting people elected into office who hold our values and care about what we care about. Mm-hmm. Because they're ultimately the people who are going to vote on the legislation. So, like, we don't always remember that one of the things that's most important is voting and putting forward candidates who will represent you and what you care about.
Speaking of, we have an election.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a lot going on. So I can't be political as a foundation person. I'm not allowed to be political in that way. But I do think as an individual, I think one of the first things is get people elected and start getting them into the elected positions, whether that's your local school council or something else early, and help them build their voice in their careers. So I think that's really important. I think that had a lot to do with where we, you know, some of the more progressive voices that we're seeing, you know, come forward. And so that's one thing.
Definitely having more mothers in politics would help.
I agree. We always joke in early childhood that the people who've been the most progressive are either those who are just have young children themselves and or have become a grandparent.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they're reminded, oh my gosh, those kids really learn so much so early, way before 6 years of age when they go to school. What should we be doing about it? And so we've seen over the years when a governor or somebody like that gets in and all of a sudden they're exposed to that again, maybe they're a little more open to some of these kinds of changes, you know.
Yeah.
It's also why on reproductive justice, it's important to have women in office, right? Because I think people speak from what they experience and what they know. And so I guess I'd start there. That's not the only thing that we can do. I also think we should just use our voice, show up at public meetings, participate in public comments. I think when there was some issues with the way the early care and education stuff came down in the city of Chicago, and I co-chair our state's early learning council for the governor. And this is not the city, so this is just the state. But even in our public meetings, we had a lot of people showing up and bearing witness and using their voice to put pressure on elected officials to do something different.
And that helps, right?
It helps. And, you know, the state's now creating a whole network of community and regional early learning councils because they want to find a way to lift up community voice to inform the way things work.
Even recently, the recent announcement about the Board of Education being an elected board ever, I think, in the history of Chicago.
I think that's right, the first time. Mm-hmm.
It's crazy, but it's awesome.
So now we have to put people forward, right? Who we want to elect, right? So I think that's the challenge, because those who tend to step forward are those who are well-financed and well-resourced, and not always the ones that represent the voices of the community. And I think that's why it's important to, shift the way philanthropy invests, right? Give more money, more unrestricted money. We've always been sort of leaned into what I would call trust-based philanthropy. It's now a term that's in the field, right? And so we do a lot of relationship-based grant making and general operating support. And I think more and more philanthropies are trying to do that, and to give the power of the resources and how they get used back to the community to do more with. And I know we're continuing to push ourselves to think about how that works in our philanthropy in a deeper way.
Love it. Yeah. Which I think takes me to a closing question here for you, and then we'll do our little outro. But thoughts on being a woman leading a foundation?
Well, I have lots of thoughts on being a white woman leading a foundation, trying to be an anti-racist organization. I think there are a lot of women in philanthropy, not as many as men in leadership roles, but more. So I'm very grateful for the role models that I've had in my career. I've now been here for 25 years, and I'll start with Irving Harris, who was my mentor for 8 years before he passed away, but many other women who have been strong leaders, both in the not-for-profit and the philanthropy sectors, who I have had the good fortune to get to know and to learn from and to observe. And so I feel like I'm just very grateful for their guidance and their leadership and their help, both in showing me where to lean in and also where to step back. And, I'm continuously working on this. So I want to just say I'm by no means, I'm an evolving human, and we all are, and I will continue to evolve and continue to push my thinking and my learning and to try to go deeper and be, as reflective as possible. I think the last 2 years has been very challenging to be a leader of any organization, let alone because we had to pivot so quickly under COVID to change the whole way we work. And holding the team through all of that. And then we've had a racial reckoning, which was long overdue. And we have a team that is primarily BIPOC women and men, and very talented group of individuals, also a little bit younger on the age spectrum. And so, everybody has experienced the last 2 years personally and professionally differently, depending on their context and their histories. And so for us as a team, it's been hard to really work at building and keeping trust. We've also brought on new people during COVID. So these are challenges and challenging times. And so I find myself having to learn whole new ways of being and ways of holding. And I have to admit, I've not always succeeded. My goal is to learn when we don't do right and to create the space in the room for our team to thrive in a safe environment. And I don't think we're there yet, to be honest. This is evolving work. But I think what we do share is a deep mission and vision for what we want to see happen for children and families. And that keeps us all sort of moving together as a unit. So I think these are challenging times to be a leader, to know how to do this work, even making the simplest of decisions of, do we go back or do we not go back? How do we hold everybody's safety? And two, how do we hold everybody as humans and their whole humanity? And how do I show up in that space? And how do we think about power? And how do we think about accountability? And these are questions we're just, continuously grappling with. And, how do we pivot and continue to push ourselves to go deeper, not just rest on our laurels of saying, well, we've been doing racial equity work for a number of years, which we have, but can we do more and deeper and differently? And the answer is yes. And what does that look like? And, as I said, I've been the co-chair of the Early Learning Council. That's been a privilege and an honor. But how do we create pathways so that we have new leadership and more diverse leadership who steps up into roles of authority and responsibility?
Absolutely.
So these are just we're deeply learning.
Yeah.
So and I look forward to, anybody who has ideas. We try to do that, and but it is hard work. It is definitely challenging, hard work.
What I also heard, I heard so many beautiful things, including like you said, deeply learning, which is to me so much better than just learning, right? It's like, because then it brought things out, like holding, which is something that I learned in coaching, but I hope it means the same, which means like holding space for anything, like anyone. And therefore, what I also heard from that is that you have a team that has expressed emotions, frustrations, so maybe sometimes anger, happiness, and everything in between with you and the foundation, which that's awesome. Like, that's awesome that, your team is bringing that out to you, and you're deeply learning how to hold on to them, hold space for them, and listen and learn and do something, with their help about what's happening.
Yes. All of the above.
Yeah.
And we have yet to really create the kind of courageous spaces. We're working on that, where people really we're getting there, but it's hard. It's hard for me. It's hard for them. But what we are doing is committed to that process, right? Yeah. So, and doing that work together, and that will hopefully be a beautiful thing, right? It's how can we find joy in this kind of liberatory work, right? And how does that, and it isn't always easy. In fact, it's never really that easy. It shouldn't be easy, because this is hard, challenging work, but I think we're all committed to getting there and to figuring out how we work together to repair and build something that, will continue to allow us to do this work in meaningful ways. So
yeah. Well, I hope they hear this and they hear your vulnerability in this space, and also like they step up, because their words are needed. Like you said, we want to hear everybody speak. We want to make sure that people are advocating for their rights and their representations and their groups. And I'm so happy that you've come on the podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I appreciate it. I've enjoyed our conversation. I have a lot to take away and think about. So thank you for that. And I look forward to knowing you more over the years and watching your work.
Thank you. I hope so too. This has been an honor. Great. I hope you come back soon. And until then.
Nice to see you, Marina. Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
There you have it. I hope you liked this episode, and please don't forget to share, like, comment on the podcast link. Tell all your networks and friends and family about it. Submit a recommendation for guests at www.unbossed.io. Subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Donate by clicking on the anchor link and help me continue to make great episodes. You can find all this information on www.unbossed.io. See you next time. Oh, that was good.